What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are doing draft or pass, and we're talking about late round players. And what do we know about late round players? Well, with late rounds, we are looking for upside. We don't want to draft the wide receiver 40 and have them have a strong chance of hitting the wide receiver 40. No, we're looking for top 20 upside. We don't care about the floor. We're looking for that ceiling. And if we have to drop them, that's fine. So these are the things we're going to look at into these players. We're only going to go through a handful, but there aren't that many players that you should completely avoid in the late rounds. So what I did was I asked you guys for some tough decisions that you guys had to make in the later rounds. And I was going to break down which player out of the two I would choose and why. And then at the end, I'll go over which players I think you should just avoid. But before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which running back with at least 30 snaps had the highest run blocking grade. The answer to that was Malcolm Brown of the Los Angeles Rams, and nobody has got that right yet. That's okay though, there's still time at the time of recording, so just continue to leave your answers in the comment section and we will credit the winner. Today's stat of the day. Which quarterback with at least 2.5 seconds in the pocket had the highest completion percentage? So which quarterback, when given at least 2.5 seconds in the pocket, had the highest completion percentage in the league among all quarterbacks? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. And if you guys could, while you're down there, let us know who your favorite late round flyer is. Give this video a like. It would really help out the channel. So thank you for that. And we will get into the video. The first two players are two wide receivers that you guys were having a tough time deciding between, and let me just say I do really like these players. It's Anthony Miller and Donte Moncrief, and if you could get both of these guys on your team in the late rounds at the receiver position, you'd be in a good spot. You have Anthony Miller, the number 2 receiver for the Bears, a very electrifying talent on top of that, and he showed us a lot of promise in his rookie season. On the other hand, you have Donte Moncrief, who has been pretty disappointing with a good quarterback in Andrew Luck in previous seasons. But when I said that Anthony Miller's an electrifying talent, Donte Moncrief, he is an insanely gifted athlete. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's 6'2", 221 pounds, runs a 4.440, which is in the 93rd percentile, 97th percentile speed score, 94th percentile burst score, and an 89th percentile catch radius. I mean, geez, it really doesn't get more athletically gifted than that. But that was why it was so crazy how he was disappointing with the Colts. Now Donte Moncrief is stepping into the number 2 receiver role on another offense with a good quarterback, and that's the Steelers offense. We know that the Steelers lost Antonio Brown, and that is going to leave a large hole in this offense that's supposedly being filled by Donte Moncrief. All reports out of camp are good, and that he has secured this role, which makes us really happy because we were high on him heading into the season, and now this just confirms everything that we had already thought. We have these two players back-to-back in the rankings, and currently in the ADP, they're both going in the 11th round. We have Donte Moncrief ahead of Anthony Miller going at the first pick of the 11th round, and Anthony Miller as the 4th pick in the 11th round. No wide receiver separates them. So they're back-to-back in the rankings at the wide receiver position in ADP as well. So yeah, there's a chance you might not be able to get both of them on your team. If you can, that would be ideal. But if not, we would probably recommend to stick with Anthony Miller. He has the most breakout potential. Remember, when you're on a team and you're switching quarterbacks, you're switching teams and you're switching quarterbacks, typically it is not a very smooth transition. Typically, there are some growing pains for free agent wide receivers, and Donte Moncrief has already underperformed with a very strong quarterback as well in Andrew Luck. So we always do have to, hope for the best but expect the worst. Anthony Miller's already on a top 10 offense, which should have even more upside heading into this year with potentially more consistent play at the quarterback position. Mitchell Trubisky is going to be another year into this offense. His role should also expand because rookie receivers do take a step forward typically in their sophomore season as well. And by all metrics, Anthony Miller was not the reason he didn't perform at a high level last season. It was just a lack of opportunity coupled with inconsistent play at the quarterback position, both of which should be fixed this year. But I will say, if Donte Moncrief continues to get the glowing reports out of camp and we see in preseason that connection is real, we very likely could flip this. But believe me, we want both of these players on your team, so it makes it really difficult for me to have to choose between these players. And hopefully you won't have to. Hopefully one of these players will be left for you, or you can grab both. It would be a disservice not to answer this question though, because this was the one that received the most amount of votes. We will move on though. And if you guys are unsure who we would take between these difficult decisions, and I didn't get to answer it today, you can always become a member and get access to our draft package for a price as low as $10, which is the least expensive in the industry. You're going to get player breakdowns as well as the rankings and access to our in-season content, our private community, and more. So if that does interest you, use the link in the description below. Get access to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com today. The next players that we're going to be choosing between is going to be Jerick McKinnon and Ito Smith. This was the one that received the second amount of votes, and I can understand why you would want to take Jerick McKinnon ahead of Ito Smith. He's actually ahead of Ito Smith in ADP by quite a few spots. So that means that most people would take Jerick McKinnon. We, in fact, would take Ito Smith, and it comes down to a few factors. We'll start with Jerick McKinnon. Jerick McKinnon, as we know, coming off the torn ACL. If you're looking at past data, comparing players, how they performed before the ACL and after it, at least the following season, Daniel Khalil, Fantasy Football Advice's injury specialist, tweeted out that in average games played, pre-torn ACL, they averaged 13 games played per season. Post-ACL, they only averaged 9. The average touchdowns pre, 11 touchdowns. Post-ACL tear, 4. So a reduction in 7 touchdowns per season. The average yards per carry dips 2 from 4.5 to 4.1, and average fantasy points per game drops by 4 total points, from 15 points per game to 11. Now, it is not a perfect study, but I think you guys can understand the point and the risks that are associated with drafting Jerick McKinnon on an already crowded backfield. Remember, they have a capable Tevin Coleman, who they just paid, and Matt Breida, who is really underrated himself. So when you factor in those things, Jerick McKinnon simply doesn't make a good target. Ito Smith, he's on a much better offense than the 49ers offense, and the only player ahead of him is Devonta Freeman. Freeman, as we know, has been a severe injury risk for this team. Now, there were some other running backs in the Hall of Fame game that did catch my eye, so, this ranking of Ito Smith could change. You'd obviously have to take a look at our rankings as we head closer to the start of the season in order to know for sure. But as it stands today, Ito Smith is the backup. And if he were to get full reins of this offense, that upside is unmatched. More so than you can say for Jerick McKinnon. The Falcons, they also spent 2 first-round picks on offensive linemen. They already had a decent offensive line. And for those reasons, Ito Smith to us just makes way more sense of a pick than Jerick McKinnon. A lot less going against him, a lot more going for him. And while the talent isn't quite as high as Jerick McKinnon, I think that the torn ACL totally negates that. But we have time for one more comparison, and then I'm going to run through some running backs and wide receivers that we are much lower than ADP on, and I think that should help you in making some late round choice decisions on players that maybe you don't want to target. That doesn't mean we are typically totally avoiding that player, but if they do fall below their ADP, we may feel comfortable taking them there, but at their current ADP, we are much lower than consensus. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's compare Russell Wilson and Cam Newton. If you ask me, I think this is a great quarterback comparison to have been requested, and I know a lot of you are probably struggling between making this choice yourself. We typically wait at the quarterback position a little bit later, but I will say myself, if I am going to pick a quarterback early, this is the range where I would start to be interested. Not only have these players finished as top 5 quarterbacks for the majority of their fantasy careers, they're also both going undervalued based on the place that they normally finish at. Other similarities, they're both mobile quarterbacks, questionable receivers on their teams, but they can make up for that lack of passing production with plays with their legs. And right now, they're both 9th round picks. You can get Russell Wilson as the first pick in the 9th round, and you can get Cam Newton as the 3rd pick in the 9th round. That equates to the quarterback 11 and quarterback 12. So yes, they are QB1s, but that's a shocker because neither of those quarterbacks typically fall any lower than that in average fantasy points per game. Russell Wilson, he averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game last season. That was actually the quarterback 12. Cam Newton, he was the quarterback 8 in points per game with 20.2. But remember, Russell Wilson, just the year before that, 2017, was arguably one of the league's MVP. He finished 2nd in points per game, only behind Deshaun Watson, who, as we know, was injured halfway through the season. But don't sleep on Cam Newton either. He was top 5 in points per game, and both of these quarterbacks typically are in that area. This season, though, people are much lower. They're coming off of down years, but players coming off of down years typically presents value. So who would we pick? It's got to be Cam Newton. And I know that's against ADP, and I know Russell Wilson won a lot of people championships last season, or 2017. but he's not running the ball as much as he used to. When he was earlier in his career, they were giving him a lot more run plays. Now it seems like they're trying to protect him. They want to keep him healthy, and he's proven to be able to get it done with his arm. So there's no reason to think that that should change. And last season, he had an incredibly high touchdown rate. Believe it or not, he completed and attempted the least amount of passes since his sophomore season. So yes, in the past 5 years, while still having a relatively consistent completion percentage and average yards per attempt, his touchdowns though, highest in his career. His interceptions, lowest in his career. If the pendulum doesn't swing in his favor, you could be severely hurting your fantasy team by having him as your quarterback. As we know, touchdowns have the greatest disparity year over year, and clearly they don't want him to be running as much as they used to. Cam Newton, on the other hand, the only concern with him is that if he is going to be healthy to start the season, and he was never placed on the PUP. He's been participating in camp since the beginning of June. All reports say that he's going to be 100% well before the start of the season, and even if he doesn't play in preseason, that should not concern you. A lot of veterans don't play in preseason. We just need him healthy for week 1. It may not feel as though he has a ton of weapons in the passing game, but if you think about it, they got rid of Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess, 2 receivers who, if we're being honest, aren't the most talented receivers. Physically, they're tall, they're fast, but both of these receivers, they failed in big situations. So even though it may not feel like they have their best receivers on the field right now with Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, and Curtis Samuel, but they probably have their best receivers on the field that he's ever had for his career. Will that mean he's going to produce at his 2015 MVP caliber level? Probably not, but Newton is at least safe to finish well above where he's being drafted. Does that mean he's the best value in the draft or makes the best pick in the draft at the quarterback position? Definitely not. You can find much better values later, but you could also do much worse than Cam Newton. Russell Wilson, on the other hand, is probably a player you should avoid. Now, really quickly, I'm going to run through some players who we are much lower than ADP on, and it doesn't mean that these players are avoids in all circumstances. They could fall low enough to where they're a good value, but where they're going currently in drafts means that they are not a target at their current ADP, and you definitely should not be reaching on these players. So let's start with some running backs. The first player worth mentioning is probably Royce Freeman. We had a lot of high expectations for him heading into this season. He was going undervalued. Philip Lindsay obviously was the main running back last season, but all signs pointed to Royce Freeman potentially having an expanded role this year. Well, do you know what ruined that? Theo Riddick. You can't realistically draft Royce Freeman now and expect that he is going to have the same amount of upside. Theo Riddick will directly impact the roles of Royce Freeman and Philip Lindsay, who had 3 down back potential. Now that 3rd down back is likely going to be Theo Riddick, and while Royce Freeman wasn't known as the better pass catcher of the two, Philip Lindsay wasn't a great pass catcher himself. He had a high drop rate, so it did leave some to be desired for Royce Freeman. Regardless, we did have to drop him in the rankings, so we are lower than ADP and much lower on the expert consensus rankings now. Things could still change in the offseason, but as for right now, that's where he stands. The next player shouldn't be a surprise. It's LaShawn McCoy, and there just isn't a chance in the world that we would draft McCoy. I don't think he could fall even low enough. He's had a massive amount of volume throughout his career, which puts him at an increased injury risk. There are 3 other running backs that are going to be competing with him for touches. They drafted a rookie running back who is extremely talented, and even with a couple injuries, I still don't see this offense being good enough for a viable running back situation. You have Josh Allen, who's going to be taking most of the goal line rushes, so say bye-bye to the touchdowns. I also don't think Josh Allen's a good enough passer to go through his progressions and make it to the dump off in time before scrambling for a first down. So there really is no situation where LaShawn McCoy makes much sense as a draft pick. So we're minus 13 on ADP, and that also goes for Devin Singletary, who we're minus 9 on ADP. I just think this backfield's going to be a backfield to avoid. A lot of the same things I said about McCoy, you can just translate over to Devin Singletary. The only upside for him over McCoy would be that we just haven't seen him yet. Maybe he is an electrifying talent who has less of an injury risk. Jerick McKinnon, we are much lower than ADP on. I'm not going to go further into him since we discussed him earlier. The next player is Kareem Hunt out of Cleveland. And it all comes down to being suspended for the first 8 weeks. It's going to impact his role in this offense. It's going to help a player like Nick Chubb solidify himself and his role in the offense, but it's really going to hurt Kareem Hunt. He's going to come into a situation where he doesn't feel comfortable. The Browns also have a bye week, so it won't be until week 10. And as long as Nick Chubb is healthy, he has been very productive. So why would you just bring Kareem Hunt in and just give him 50% of the carries? And is 50% of the carries even enough for him to be a viable starter, at least one that you feel confident in putting in anything more than a flex? Probably not. And like I said, you're still sitting on him until week 10. So realistically, it's just not a good draft pick. And then one last one is just Peyton Barber, and that's because we are much higher on Ronald Jones this year. We saw what Peyton Barber could do. He was a great draft pick last year. He had all of the touches, 9th most touches in the league. Did that equate to fantasy points? No. And for that, where is the upside in this pick at best? If he does not improve dramatically and gets the same amount of touches, it would be a terrible draft pick. So he not only has to get all the touches, he also has to perform better than he did last season. He didn't show us enough. He left a lot to be desired, and for that, we're not trusting on his ability. We would much rather take a shot on somebody like Ronald Jones, who we have not seen yet. We have not seen his ability. So that'll do it for the running backs, the ones we are lowest on than consensus. Let's get over to some wide receivers. There are only a few wide receivers that stick out, and some of them are the aging veterans, players like Golden Tate, who, as we know, is suspended for 3 games, so he may go down as well in ADP, which may put him more aligned with where we currently have him ranked, which is in the 60s. But we also have Emmanuel Sanders, who we could rise on during the offseason. It depends on what we see in preseason, but we're unsure exactly how much he's going to play. He's still recovering from the Achilles injury, which is a nasty injury, which makes it almost completely shocking that he is on the field and performing. But regardless, we are lower than ADP on him. Another player we are not high on at all is Tyrell Williams. Yes, he's been productive year over year, but that was with Phillip Rivers. Okay, now you have Derek Carr. And no, he's not coming in to be the wide receiver one. If he did, he would have somewhat upside, but with Antonio Brown there guaranteeing him to be second at best in targets, it's just not a very fruitful role for him. I could see 800 to 900 yards being somewhere where he finishes, but remember, he's a deep play threat, so even if he reaches that goal, it's going to be on the back of, 2 or 3 big games where the deep ball connects. We don't typically like to have those type of players on our team, or at least as main contributors on our team, because you never know exactly when those days are going to come. He may help you win a week, but he may hurt you more weeks than he helps you, and for that, just another reason not to have him on the team. We're lower than ADP on him. A.J. Brown out of Tennessee, lower than ADP on him. Comes down to the lack of ability from Marcus Mariota, the already crowded offensive passing game with Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, Delaney Walker, and more, and it's just going to be low volume. They want to run the ball. They want to run it with Derrick Henry. They want to establish the run game. They were most productive and actually had a decent offense when they did it, so why would they move away from it? So it just all makes sense. And rookie receivers themselves, they're already going to be more inconsistent. So when you add all those factors up, it just doesn't leave a lot of room for upside. The next player is James Washington, and it comes down to the faith we have in Dante Moncrief to potentially be that guy and to potentially break out in James Washington. When you look at his advanced metrics and not just looking at his production, he was really disappointing last season, and the Pittsburgh Steelers have been known to give guys shots, but as soon as you get on their bad side, you are on their bad side. And I think James Washington has already had more opportunities than some of the other receivers who have failed in the past. So it's only a matter of time. If he does not perform well, he is not going to get an opportunity. They're probably going to go next man up and just completely bury him on the depth chart. And that goes double if he plays bad. If he plays bad, you can guarantee that's going to happen. And then the last player, Mecole Hardman. I know people are still drafting him right now. I don't think you need to draft him. Tyreek Hill's back. Travis Kelce's still there. Sammy Watkins still healthy for now. But we're not handcuffing Sammy Watkins. Even though Sammy Watkins is going to be probably one of the most injury-prone players in the league, and if you had to make a bet on which player wouldn't finish the year, it would probably be him. Regardless, though, that third wide receiver role is not 100% valuable and consistent. So can you trust it to be started every week or to have the type of upside you're looking for? No, it would take 2 injuries, maybe Tyreek Hill going down and also Sammy Watkins for him to be a viable starter. So for that, that's just too much of an uphill battle. And are we already assuming if it's only 1 injury that he is going to be as good as Sammy Watkins? I think that's a stretch as well. So when you add all those factors up, there's too much going against him, not enough going for him, and there are other late round picks at wide receiver that make much more sense to draft. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. If you really did enjoy, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.